All right, so before you roll your eyes at how long this video is, just understand this is my third take because my dog keeps going nuts literally at the very end of the presentation. So multiply your eye rolling by 3, and then you'll get to where I am. Okay, where are we? Here we go. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the AP Lang exam semester 1 data roundup and feedback. So I'm going to be talking all about everything that happened on the AP Lang exam and what we can do moving forward. So the first thing I'm going to start with is this: 44.9% of us, if the AP test itself were taken as just our exam, would have earned a qualifying score. So that, I think, is a really good spot to be in right now at this point in the year, because last year we had a 50% pass rate, which is very good. And so I think 45% right now is a pretty good place to be. We definitely have a lot of work to do, and I do not want you to forget that you have a multiple choice section, which didn't really count for this particular exam, and you also have a third argument essay that will be on the AP test. So it will get a little bit harder, but I think in general, to be at 45% right now to earn a qualifying score is a pretty good place to be. If you compare the overall raw score for the 2 timed essays on this exam with the previous timed essay averages of the other of all semester 1, we went down by 12%. This is not surprising to me at all, and actually I think this is pretty decent performance, because it was the first time we had done 2 timed essays in a row, back to back. Okay, so obviously speed and more timed writing is going to be a big focus in semester 2. But I think in general, even though we did take a dip in the average, I think it's not surprising, and it's okay, because we haven't done this type of marathon exam before, and it is hard. I'm very proud of everyone's effort on the exam. Even though on average, as an AP Lang group, we did take a dip in the timed essay averages, there were a handful of people who beat their timed essay averages from semester 1 on the exam. So I want to give a big shout out to Darren, Demarian, AK, Demara, Michaela, Angel, Alex Guzman, Nixon, and Masayo. You guys did a really good job on the exam. I was extremely proud of your performance, and so there's a lot of good stuff happening for you in the exam. You should be proud of that. In addition to those folks, there's a group of people who averaged over a 75% raw score on both of the essays. And this means that they're on track for a 4 or a 5 on the AP test. So Jaleel, Ibrahim Damara, and Alex Guzman, big shout out to you. Extremely impressive exam. You did a really, really good job. So I'm very excited about that. There was a 9-point curve on the exam after the standard square root curve that I typically apply. So most of you are familiar with this. I'm going to go over the scoring very briefly here, but basically each essay is worth 6. And so that means the entire exam was worth 12 points. So if you, across 2 essays, if you averaged 3 out of 6 on both essays, you would have had a raw score of 6 out of 12, which is 0.5 or 50%. If you take the square root of 0.5, that's 0.71. And that's what you would have gotten in a essay that was not curved, was a 71%. But since I curved the exam a little bit to have the mean shake out to a 75 after. And so that additional 9 points, basically, if you have an 80% in Power School, what it means is you got a 6 out of 12. If you have below an 80%, it means you're slightly off track for a qualifying score. And if you have above an 80%, it means that you are slightly above that you are on track or slightly above for a qualifying score of a 3 or higher when we actually take the AP test in the fall, or excuse me, in the spring. I just mentioned this, but 80%, that's kind of the benchmark. If in Power School you have 80 or higher, that means generally you're on track for a 3 or higher. And then if you did not get that, it means according to this exam, you're not on track. But I'm very confident in everyone, and I really think everyone can get a 3 or higher on the exam. I'm not too worried about that. if there's a group of people who got a 74 on the test, if that's your grade in PowerSchool, this means that you're extremely close to earning a qualifying score. There's a couple things that were issues with either your rhetorical analysis or synthesis essay, but I'm very confident that if you practice and prepare, it's not going to take much to get you into that 3 range, maybe even the 4 or the 5. If we included you, we would have had a 52% pass rate or qualifying score rate on this particular exam. And then there's another group of people. This is a kind of a big chunk of people. If you got a 67% in PowerSchool on your exam, this means that you are still pretty close to earning a qualifying score. A lot of the bones and the DNA of your writing is there. And if you kind of buckle down and listen to this presentation and really implement the feedback that I'm going to go over here, you will have a qualifying score. I'm very confident in that. It might take a little bit more work, but I know for sure that you can do that. And if we include that group of people who got a 67%, we would have a 71% pass rate on the AP test, which is actually a really astronomical pass rate. And so I really think that we could do that. And I really want you to commit, and I know that you can do it. It would be a huge win for you and for your college applications and everything if you did that. So the next group of people there is a group of people who scored below a 67%. I know that's not how you wanted the exam to go. Nothing is impossible, all right? Maybe you had a bad day. Maybe you struggled with your focus, whatever the reason is. There's a lot of time still left before the actual AP test itself. And also, I don't want people, I know I'm talking about the AP test, but that's not the only thing this class is about. And so I don't want to put too much stock into the actual AP scores. But I do want to say, if you didn't do well on the exam, I still fully believe that you can earn a qualifying score and do really well in semester 2. A lot of these skills that we're going to be reviewing and the types of writing and reading that we're going to be doing in semester 2, it's all very cyclical. Okay, so you'll have a second chance. You can do well in semester 2. There's still a lot of time. This is my feedback for like these different groups of people, okay? If you got above a 90% on the exam, what you need to think about is consistently earning sophistication points, and then also kind of buckling down and really prioritizing multiple choice practice in AP Classroom. I know that we haven't done a ton of multiple choice practice throughout semester 1, but it is an important part of the exam, not as important generally as your ability to write strong essays, but it's an important part of the exam. And in order to get a 4 or a 5, you need to have a really strong showing with multiple choice. If you scored between an 80 and 90% for the exam, your goal for the AP test should be a 4. This means that your focus is on developing your line of reasoning and making really clear and complex connections between your assertions and your thesis. If you score between a 70 and 80%, your goal for the AP test should be either a 3 or a 4, kind of depending. And your focus should be doing a better job of establishing your line of reasoning, which is a better job of grouping your assertions and your analysis more carefully, having more precise assertions, and then in some cases, just stronger evidence selection, doing a better job of your accurate reading. If you scored below a 70 on the exam, the number one focus that you need to have for all types of writing is the accuracy of your thesis sentence. So this involves more carefully reading the prompt and then having a very active strategy before you reading. And especially with synthesis, it's about like grouping your evidence before you jump in to the text. So you got to really know what you're looking for with both synthesis and rhetorical analysis. Right? And this leads me to the next thing, right? There are 2 different modes of writing, or were on the exam. There's actually 3 different modes of writing on the AP test, but the 2 that were tested on the exam were rhetorical analysis, which is a deep analysis of one piece of rhetoric. So that's you really analyzing the relationship between the speaker and the audience and thinking about the different assumptions that are being made and the different appeals that really drive the persuasion and the message. That's a different mode of writing than synthesis, which is you actively constructing your argument based on a variety of different sources. So if you're doing a synthesis task, your job is to read multiple different perspectives, group them, and categorize the evidence and data, right? And then your job is to support a clear position on a specific issue, right? And you won't know either the rhetoric or the synthesis issue until the actual test, but it's your job to be actively developing this in the appropriate amount of time. I'm going to focus first on feedback for the rhetorical analysis essay. So yeah, here's the question. If a lot of you sitting here thinking, okay, well, how do I approach the rhetorical analysis essay? You haven't talked about it since September. All right, this is your review. The number one question that you need to answer for rhetorical analysis is, why is this persuasive? Why is this persuasive? And this is what you need to do in order to answer that question, okay? The first thing that you need to do is to accurately read the rhetoric. Okay, it sounds a lot easier than it is sometimes, because especially you'll be given some complex texts and it's challenging to read. But the biggest step is to accurately read the rhetoric in 15 minutes. And I cannot stress enough in this portion how important sectioning is, right? Splitting the text up section by section and identifying the different assumptions and the appeals that are made throughout the text, okay? Tracking the changes in the tone, or even sometimes tracking the changes in the appeals or the message, right? There's going to be one core message of the rhetoric, but there are going to be multiple changes of tone or idea that the speaker will use to get to sort of develop their rhetoric and fully flesh out their message. So that's step one. That you have to do that in 10 or 15 minutes. And then the next step is to outline. And you have to do that in 5 minutes. Okay. If you're spending more than 20 minutes total on these two steps, you're in trouble. But you got to outline in 5 minutes. And if you skip that crucial 5-minute step, your writing is going to fall apart. Then you need a clear thesis that accurately names the core purpose and appeals in order of the text. Okay, this should guide your reader step by step through the rhetoric. First they do this, then they do this, then they do this. That's how they get their message across. You are developing clear and accurate assertions that describe the appeals, not the devices. The devices are best used as pieces of evidence, right, to support a larger appeal to the audience. And so right now we're reading Ta-Nehisi Coates. And if you think about how he opens up that essay in Between the World and Me, or the section Between the World and Me, you would say something about how he's building his own ethos, both his credibility and his values as a father. He's building his ethos with his son by creating a shared sense of fear, right? Or at least demonstrating his sense of fear and being vulnerable with his son. And the way that he does that is through the device of an anecdote. So it's important to understand that devices are really used as evidence, and they're kind of not really big enough ideas in many cases to be their own assertion, because an assertion should really focus on the appeals within a given section. These are the most common mistakes that I saw in the rhetorical analysis essays on the exam, that you're not making the connection between the speaker and the audience. Okay, when you don't make that connection, you end up just summarizing the text instead of more deeply analyzing the rhetorical choices that the author is actively and intentionally making. The other mistake that I noticed is that people are not organizing their analysis by sectioning. Instead, they're grouping appeals by ethos or pathos or some other idea. Now, that's my mistake, because I was not clear enough with this at the beginning of the year, but I'm trying to be super clear right now. Sometimes a speaker or an author is going to appeal to the same emotion or value at different points within their rhetoric, okay, or their message. And a lot of us are kind of grabbing and reorganizing evidence to fit these different ideas, and it really just makes things confusing, right? You don't want to be grabbing a piece of fear evidence in paragraph 1 and then a piece of fear evidence in paragraph 7 in order to develop a fear paragraph when you're like kind of skipping over the middle of the rhetoric, right? That becomes very confusing, and I think it really leads to people's writing falling apart. So again, your rhetorical analysis essay should go in order of the sectioning, in order of the rhetoric itself. And then again, the last mistake and the most common mistake that I see with rhetorical analysis essays are vague or inaccurate descriptions of the appeals, okay? Many people are still saying things like he appeals to ethos or she appeals to pathos without actually describing the value, or the emotion. So you must always name the precise value or emotion that you're seeing in the rhetoric and name why the speaker is actively deciding to use that appeal, okay? All of that, you do all of that given the overall audience and the rhetorical situation. So these are all really complex and layered steps that you need to do in order to have a really strong rhetorical analysis essay, but you can do it. You're all extremely smart. These are my tips for timed writing, okay, for rhetorical analysis. Don't just stop writing intro paragraphs, okay? I didn't draw a clear line in the sand here because I know a lot of you want to use intro paragraphs, and yes, they're helpful in untimed writing. For a timed essay, just stop, okay? Unless you're getting 5s or 6s consistently on the rubric and you actively want to write an intro paragraph, just write the thesis and jump into the body paragraph, okay? A thesis can and should often be its own paragraph and its own line, and that's it. Just write the thesis and jump into your assertions. If you do decide to go for more than this in your intro paragraph, it should literally never be more than 3 sentences max, okay? I don't care. I basically never read intro paragraphs. They don't matter to me, especially in timed writing. So don't worry about them. Just write the thesis and jump right in. Next, you got to practice your sectioning. Everyone, no matter what your score was on the exam, needs to practice sectioning, practice this move of splitting up the rhetoric and thinking about what are they doing in this first part and then the second part and then the third part? How does it all fit together? Everyone needs to do that. Some of you need to memorize better words. Just sit there and memorize better words for emotions and values, okay? So if you're not using very specific emotion and value words in your assertions, you're not going to score well. And in order for you to be more precise, you just kind of have to have a bigger bank of words and more tools to choose from in order to build your assertion. So that's the biggest thing that a lot of you can do as well. And then I mentioned this previously, but yes, everyone's doing a good job of recognizing and talking and naming about devices when they see them in the rhetorical analysis essay, but they aren't the most important thing. So you want to stay away from device-driven thesis and assertions. Okay, you don't want to say, in order to achieve their message, the speaker uses repetition and imagery and allegory, right? Those are just evidence, right? They're often just evidence in order to get to a larger function of the rhetoric. And so anytime you're using devices, you should really be just kind of understanding them as one concrete piece of evidence to support a larger claim about whatever the appeal is, the emotion or the value or the message that the speaker is trying to get across. I'm going to talk now a little bit about synthesis essays, okay? So here's the next part. How do I approach the synthesis essay? This is the most important question that you need to answer for synthesis. What is my position? You as a sentient, conscious, individual human being who has an active and working brain, what is my position on the issue at hand? Here's the process, okay? This is what you need to do. You need to actively read and categorize the sources in 15 minutes. This is really hard because there's 6 to 7 sources and you need to read them all and you need to know what they're talking about, and you need to identify similarities and differences actively as you're reading between the sources, okay? That's a hard thing to do in 15 minutes, but that's what you got to be able to do. As you're doing that, you need to identify the tension or the question or the spectrum, whatever it is within the given issue, right? There's multiple different ideas or issues that you could sort of take as you're reading the sources, and then you're given multiple different perspectives within the sources. Your job is to stake out your position, okay? Stake out your position very clearly. Oh my God. Okay, I'm literally not re-recording this again. Lucille, stop it. Okay, sorry folks. I've recorded this too many times, so this is what you're gonna get. In the synthesis essay, the most important thing that you need to do is stake out your position, okay? Place the sources generally in agreement or disagreement with you. Clearly develop a position on whatever the topic is that you use as a line of reasoning that you think of independently not necessarily one that's presented in the sources, although you can sort of use some positions that are presented in the sources. But ultimately, the synthesis essay is you saying we should do X because of A, B, and C. And A, B, and C are the different ideas that you get when you are reading the sources. These are the most common mistakes that I see in synthesis writing. Okay, the first mistake is sitting on the fence. If I read your essay and half of it is about, okay, well, on the one hand, and then the other half is, but on the other hand, and then these are both pretty good ideas and blah, 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 you're not going to score very well because you're not making an active argument. Okay, so get off the fence, make a choice, and defend your argument. The next big mistake is people are summarizing sources instead of actively using them to support your own thinking. Okay, this isn't summary. It's not rhetorical analysis. It's you are relying on what you see in the sources and what you have given to you to actively make an argument about whatever the issue is. The biggest thing that people need practice with, everyone needs practice with, is making a prediction based on the prompt. Okay, it becomes very evident within the first 30 seconds of reading your essay. It becomes very evident very fast if you do not understand the issue at hand. Okay, within the first couple paragraphs, I know if you had a good handle on the sources. So if you make a prediction based on the prompt, you're going to do a much better job of looking actively for specific ideas when you are reading the source, and that's actually going to make your reading go a lot faster. And then the biggest other mistake that I see a lot of other people making is looking for direct agreement or disagreement within the sources. Not everything is a yes or no argument. Okay. For example, I asked you in our last unit, the argument you were making was responding to, should the Electoral College be abolished? Okay. That is a yes or no question, but there's also some shades of gray in there because there's room for reform, right? And many of you took a position in between yes and no and said it should be this specific type of reform. And so when you're reading the actual sources within a synthesis argument or the synthesis task, they're not going to necessarily agree or disagree directly with one another. It's because you are the person who's responsible for coming up with the argument and coming up with the ideas and to support the argument, and you're just kind of relying on those sources as the evidence to back up your own claims and your own line of reasoning. So again, here are my tips for synthesis writing. Number one, Black Lives Matter. Intro paragraphs do not matter. Just write the thesis, jump into your body paragraphs. Okay, number two, again, I've been kind of talking a lot about this. Independently develop your own line of reasoning before you jump into the sources. And a lot of people are kind of skipping this step, and we do need a little bit more practice with it. This is going to give you a better idea of what to look for as you're actively testing out your own line of reasoning as you read. And this is actually a really complex thing to do. But what you want to do is kind of split your brain into two different channels, right? And channel one is your brain just kind of understanding what you're reading. Okay. And then the other channel is you testing out or grouping different sources based on what they say against your own understanding or your own line of reasoning. So an example of this, right? There was one of the prompts on the exam was about space travel, right? And so as soon as I know that the prompt is about space travel, I'm gonna think to myself, okay, one argument could be more space travel would be good. And the reasons it could be good would be because of the idea of discovery, or the problem of pollution, right? Maybe we can solve the problem of pollution if we just shoot it into space. And then we have climate change, right? So there's this massive thing of climate change. And I know that this is like very sci-fi, but like maybe if we colonize Mars, maybe Earth is not going to be habitable, right? So you're just kind of brainstorming and coming up with your own ideas for why specific things should be supportive of your argument, right? And so that's really you developing your own line of reasoning. All right, before we close out, I want to make a couple points here. Rhetorical analysis and synthesis were what were tested on the exam. All right. There is a third type of writing that we really haven't, I'm just previewing this right now because we haven't really practiced it yet. But there is a different type of prompt, and it's called the argument prompt. The argument prompt is literally you construct your own argument cold with no sourcing. You don't need to read anything. You're not reading, there's no rhetorical analysis or synthesis or anything. It's just a simple question that's given to you, and you just invent an argument from the top of your head as a standalone writer, right? Whatever the line of reasoning is. So a couple years ago, the prompt was, what is overrated? That's it. That's all they gave you. There was like a little bit of context and a quote to help you think, but it's just, what is overrated? And you have to develop a strong essay in response to that question. So some of my students wrote funny things. And you will kind of get credit on this type of writing if you're like snarky and funny and being sarcastic and everything. But you just kind of sit there and think what's overrated, and you make a good argument for that thing being overrated. And so some of my students wrote things like the patriarchy is overrated, or Steph Curry, or working from home, or owning a dog, as is evident in this presentation. Cardi B, the Electoral College, right? Like anything that comes to mind, is your job to just kind of think of it, answer it, and make an interesting and compelling argument as a writer. There's no sources or text evidence that you need with that type of task. So you will have very, very detailed line edits and revisions from the grade network. I'm going to give you some time on your own, both in groups and on your own. And I'm also to work on those revisions. And what I'm going to say is that the first performance grade for Q3 is actually going to be your exam revisions. So these will be due after February break at 9 a.m. It's actually the second performance grade because there's a quiz, but you do have exam revisions due, but I'm trying to give you a bunch of time to do them. So those are going to be due right the Monday after break at 9 a.m. But I'm giving them to you now so that you kind of know and you have it on your radar. I want to close. I was thinking about how to close this long presentation. And so I wanted to think about, all right, well, who are really important writers that I admire, and why is being good at this stuff important? So my first quote is from one of my favorite authors, Stephen King. And he says, if you don't have time to read, you don't have time or the tools to write. Simple as that. And I think that's very true. Next up, we have Mr. Ernest Hemingway. I love this one. There is nothing to writing. All you do is sit down at a typewriter and bleed. That's a pretty metal quote right there. All you do is sit down. I like that one. Next up, we have a beautiful, an amazing writer that I really admire, Toni Morrison. And I like this one. If there's a book you want to read, but it hasn't been written yet, then you must write it. And so one day, after your amazing AP Lang class, maybe you're going to write that book. So I hope you do. And then you might know this guy. This is perhaps the most transformative quote for me in all of remote instruction. It's posted on Google Classroom by Jim Marist. So I think if you just kind of sit and think and marinate on that, it'll be really important and transformative for your writing. So there you have it. That's my exam roundup and data roundup. Good luck, everybody. I am extremely proud of our performance on this exam, and you should be too. So yeah, good luck with your edits, and I'll see you in class. Okay, see ya.